Okay. Hi, I'm Fleur Boos. Having worked in the trade finance industry for a long time in the from a financial perspective, having involved in setting up platforms based on blockchain, and currently working at the value department, and actually a PhD candidate on platform governance and ecosystems.
Guys, we are kicking this off in 2023, and sorry for those who will listen to this for the unusual occasion. That's how life goes. You say you have to be flexible and prepared. So Enrique and myself, we are deeply focused this year, 2023, after talking a lot about ESG and sustainability in 2022, both in Hyperledger and this association, the SCA Europe and the SCA in general. We discussed in depth in 2022 those topics. This year we agreed on focusing more into the governance side of business. So BoB, which is our special consultant, he agreed on setting this up and having you, Fleur, since you're an expert with governance to these topics. And it's a good occasion because you wrote a very interesting article recently, which got posted and I reposted. I think it's really insightful one because it comes at the right time after all that was happening recently. And we all know what I'm talking about. I mean, the Maersk, the trade lens affair. So it's good to dig out these topics in depth and see how the future looks like. I leave them to you, BoB, to start talking, and to you, Fleur, to discuss this article that you wrote. And congratulations for this, because I think it's really a good one. So for a while, I'll mute myself and I'll intervene from time to time.
Go back to your decentralized office.
No, it's very decentralized, my office, but you see, when you make blockchain, you have to be centralized.
Absolutely.
And the funny thing is that people pass by and they hear me talking and speaking English, and they look at me like,
"Hey."
What is this?
Actually, what they're saying is, are you talking about Bitcoins again? No, we're talking about blockchain.
Talking about DLTs, we're talking about governance. So don't bother us.
Exactly. All yours, BoB.
Who wants It's all you.
Well, I think it's very good first to get a good understanding what actually is governance, because that is a difficult topic in itself, or maybe the definition. So if I would describe it, it's a little bit about the explicit and or implicit type of structures, rules, and practices that frame and direct the behavior in interplay of participants in an organization or in something that could be a corporate, it could be a platform or an ecosystem in itself. That could be one of the definitions. I know that Fleur also has one. I don't know if she knows it by heart, as you can actually state how it is, because I always forget it.
No, I fully agree, BoB. I think governance is a big topic, an important topic, but it has also a lot of meanings. And I think the words you mentioned is the rules, motivation, coordination, resolve conflicts, decision-making authority. I think these are all activities part of governance. And of course, distribute value, because the reason why you use often governance is to maximize or create value and distribute it accordingly. So I would add that piece in mind.
I could fully agree with it. And I think it all starts basically with a certain strategic view you have or vision you have, what you would like to achieve. So you have a mission, you want to achieve something, and that's really the goal you would like to achieve, maybe not only on yourself, and if you do it certainly with other people or partnerships, that you also have that in common. So that comes also a little bit about culture, what you want to achieve, how do you work together. So we talk about values as well, which are very important. And then of course, I think the next topic is then, okay, who can participate in this part or not, Fleur? Or do you see there is another type of way of tackling this?
No, you're definitely right. What I see is that you indeed need to have a purpose or a common goal or a motivation to be on the platform. And then the reason is, so what will you do on the platform, and how will you participate in a platform? And I think with the difficulties with platform, or compared to a traditional more model, is that you have different sides and they all interact. And if you change on one side, it has impact on the other side. And I think that's also so who you bring to the platform, who you provide access, what rules you set on what they can do and what they can't do, but also the rules you have in place that if someone violates the rules, what do you then do? We have seen, I think, the headlines already a year ago about shadow banning, that someone on Twitter, if I was not mistaken, or Reddit, was held off the platform, but that person didn't know. So that is also something tells you about governance. How can you interact, and are you transparent how that your complementers and participants know how they interact? I don't know if you have seen similar examples recently, or
Yeah, there are, I think, a number of out there which actually show what is the effect of governance and why certain companies succeed or ecosystems or platforms succeed, which I use a lot myself as examples are the combination or the distinction between, BlackBerry in the past, very dominant telephone brand, and then you had Apple, and they started with the smartphones. And then you saw that Apple saw so smart, okay, we really need to have included developers so they can create the app, so we can create some kind of ecosystem. BlackBerry didn't see it that way. So there was a huge effect, at least of acceptance, and therefore about growing, etc. And that was then a governance system in that perspective, which was really successful, and BlackBerry disappeared. So, and in the same time, you have now the Apple system versus Android, something which is much more controlled and restrictive versus very open and even accessible. In a way, both are succeeding, but they have completely different governance models and perspectives, what they would like to achieve in that perspective. So also there is no one rule or one size fits all in that perspective. So that becomes also very difficult. So you always have to think in mind, okay, what would like achieve and how can you actually do that with the best with type of ruling and not restrict it too much. So you have to be dynamical and adaptable also over time.
Yes, I fully recognize that, and that's indeed interesting. If you compare the Android versus the iOS or the Apple Store and the Play, is that Apples have very strict quality controls with a very dedicated manual which requirements to meet to be active and develop, while Android hasn't, and both they are successful. It may have also to do with the system they're used on. And so are there other factors and influences of a successful governance that are actually outside the control of a company?
When I hear you say the word also control, that I also have to relate it to leadership because that was very important. There was one party probably which acts as a leader in the whole governance model. Is that also what you actually just referred to then? Then that company or party should really take a certain role, and if they don't succeed in it, basically nothing succeeds?
I have not tested it empirically everywhere, but I do think that if it's unclear for the participants on a platform what the position of the leadership is and how the leadership is perceived, then I think it's very difficult to have a good governance structure, because the anticipation of your participants could be different than what you actually mean with a governance setting.
It's a very strict transparency, by the way, Fleur.
Yes.
Also in terms of leadership, you have to be fully transparent, you have to be acknowledged as such. So the more strict you are, the better it will be, the whole ecosystem. So I like calling this ecosystems instead of platforms and things, because it gives more the idea of something dynamic and ever changing.
Yes, you're right. You're right. And I think indeed where I use the word platform, it is indeed what in my mind, like multiple sides, kind of an ecosystem platform or ecosystem. So you're completely right. And I think there it comes indeed with the leadership transparency, very important that people know that I think that is perceived as very well, that participants know, or actors in the ecosystem understand what is being offered, what they do. And I think Bob earlier referred to identity. I think it is very important that participants in the ecosystem can relate to the identity. Yeah? I think it is an unicum to have one identity because you have various different ecosystem where we all participate in daily and we just have one personality. So there are multiple identities in which you work, but I think if you have a good transparent way of working and a clear identity where people can relate with or not, but then understand why that identity is there, these are very important items that create the leadership that is required to get the actors cooperating with each other. And I think that's where it's all about. You really want to cooperate together to create the value. And I think that's also where the distribution of value and how you share is your ecosystem, how open is it, from who is the IP, what is done, how's the profit, or if it's a non-for-profit, how is it all shared amongst each other? I think the more distributed it could be, without making it too complex, the more value you create together.
And you just brought up a great point, Fleur. End of last year, which is 2022 already, we had a very famous case of TradeLens that actually shut down its doors. And I don't think any of us four are within the secret of the gods. We're not on the inside, but word is that it was a governance problem, right? So they've set up their whole structure around making profit out of the data, which is in itself is not a bad thing. Not against making a profit, but that the governance of that model is what brought down the whole ecosystem. And we had actually a great webinar by GSBN this morning and Hyperledger, whereas GSBN set themselves up as a non-for-profit where they manage the ecosystem. They are making money, there are fees, but still the data governance is a completely different structure. So two ways of looking at the same thing, right? The same results. But one apparently failed. Again, we don't know the exact reason why, but something it's about the governance. So what are your thoughts on the whole TradeLens story?
No, I think it's a very interesting story to dive into. Because from the outside, if you hear the story, you see two great companies with a strong position and the knowledge in a great combination. And I think they have been working for a couple of years where they had indeed adding on warehouses and ports, if I was not mistaken. So it was set up for success. And then you feel, okay, you know that building such a thing costs a lot of money as well. And I think that's always you need to make sure you can have it. So if you look from the outside, you think, okay, the key ingredients to make this a success could be there. But indeed, then if the perception or reality, we don't know, I don't know, is that it's not fair or that it's unclear or untransparent and that there's something in the data sharing that is not for everyone or goes to the biggest, then you see that the industry or actually the ecosystem will not accept it. And then they might not be, because I think also with TradeLens, I truly believe in such type of platforms, but it is an investment from everyone, also from the other actors. So if then you need to make such an investment and you're not sure what about such important things, I can understand that you think twice, especially what I've seen in the beginning. Every platform is, every ecosystem is open and really wants to have as much as participants as possible. Upon a time that there's really the power within one of the orchestrators of an ecosystem, and then comes with quality controls or any other power dynamics, where as a complementer you may get worse off. So I can understand that people are not only skeptical in the beginning when it's untested and still in a pilot phase of a platform, but you know that the dynamics can change. So
yeah, and I also think there are multiple things actually which played a role over there. It's just from my point of view, because the two strong brands, which created another brand, but it never was felt to be a separate brand. So not really something independent. It was still providing a lot of services for the two brands which it started. So it was a very central governance system, and now they try to open it up by inviting more. But then it was a little bit unclear what was actually the value they shared together and what was it in for the other parties. Because if they still had to pay for it, they didn't really get much back for it. Maybe transparency was inside, but it was too little in their perspective. So they were quite still strongly bound to maybe something was very central and old-time thinking, while you use technology, which is much more decentralized, and therefore also you have to think completely about the ways of interacting and engaging with each other and sharing the value. So in that perspective, that might have been two reasons why it could have been creating an issue. And of course, if they don't really get a lot of payment for it, after a while, the companies also say, yeah, I'm not going to invest more in it because there's nothing getting out of it. So that is then clear. If the business model doesn't work, yeah, that is then the end of it as well. So yeah, a number of things adding up together.
Yeah, you pointed out as something really interesting, Bob, when you said two brands, actually not a single one. So he never got really independent from the companies and the brands that breed it.
Yeah.
So that's maybe another issue, because in my talks, when I thought about trade lands, I was never referred to them as trade lands. I was always referred to them as one company or the other one.
Mm.
You know what I mean? Oh, look at that. You're talking to trade lands. So you're talking to one of them. No, I'm talking to trade lands. So this is really interesting to me, because how much those companies they put in efforts in branding and make it autonomous in a certain way, which of course affects governance in trade lands.
It's going to be fun in a few years from now to see if we're having the same conversation or a different conversation about GSBN.
Oh, I got my own idea, but cannot express in this moment, because I have friends and acquaintances over there. So
you're not putting any money down, is what you're telling me, right? We're not having a bet.
No
bets.
I don't like betting, actually. No bets. No. I got my own opinions, not bets. I'm firmly against bets. See, I might be wrong, and I'm often wrong. Hopefully I will be wrong, because we all know what this brings, you see, for the future, and we are pushing for it. So we all fully engaged for achieving full digitalization of trade. Actually, on my own, and Bob knows, because we have talked to each other several times in this, I'm firmly favorable in creating digitally native forms of governance. We discussed this last time, Bob, if you remember. It was, you have paper-based governance, you have digitization, you have digitalization, the digital transformation. And I share this with a good friend of mine, Mauricio, by the way. We're going to have him on talks in the future, hopefully. It's a long journey that goes through 3 steps, a long and winding road. Maybe we should be now looking, and it's maybe time for these, especially reframing this into supply chain and trade finance space, to go searching for a new way of doing this. Why replicating what's been done for centuries in a digital form instead of going straight for new ones? I'll leave it on to you to expand into this, Bob, if you wish to.
Well, yeah, but then we're shifting completely in different topics in a way, but it's true because what you see is like we have a lot of new technology available, which can help us to do things differently. But what you see is just we copy exactly what we have into this new thing without starting to realize like, is there another way of doing it? Can we actually improve it? And that is not only happening normally in systems in an organization, but we do the same thing now for larger supply chains or interactions with the government, etc. While maybe we can do it completely different. but it's very difficult to do that currently because of all the laws and regulations we have to also obey to, and much of them are still very much focused on the paper-based situation, as well as that it is under control because you always have a legal entity involved or something like that. And if you think about blockchain technology, you have to move also a lot of rules and regulations. They move and shift to smart contracts and tokens and that, etc., which comes completely different because you're not in control with a natural person anymore or a legal entity. So that creates much more friction and difficulties as well. But I completely agree that it is a time to really start thinking, if we have these marvelous technologies and you could things differently, how could we do it differently, and see if we can move forward to that instead of trying to copy what we have and then slightly adapt to something new while you don't really make any changes. Or it takes too much time, and then what is the effort? Why is it required? Because then the technology could also be obsolete, basically, because you can follow the same thing as you have been doing before. It doesn't bring extra value, only an extra amount of costs.
Well, it's about change management, pure and simple, right? Setting the right expectations, knowing where you want to go, and helping the folks who struggle to change. And God knows that within supply chain and shipping, we have trouble with change management. We don't change very fast, right? You know, it's helping our industry look at different ways. And you brought up a good point. I once had a conversation with Odile at Renault Automobiles, who's in charge of their blockchain project, and she mentioned, yes, the transformation of paper documents to digital documents using blockchains is an absolute benefit. But the one benefit that I saw more so impact the overall the structure of their project and the partners involved was the ecosystem of innovation that it brought. People started looking at different ways of doing business because of the technology. So yes, they started by moving their processes from paper to digital, right, using blockchain, but then it opened up a whole bunch of different possibilities for them. And again, that's probably because of good governance. They knew what they wanted to do. They had a fair structure between all the parties, and that opened up the floodgates for the rest of them.
And I think you point out a really nice point there, Erik, is basically there's so many platforms out there, so you can become part of an ecosystem as a participant of it. And you wonder, which one do I actually have to choose, because there's so many. Where do I have to bet on? It's very difficult. And I think one of the key things was what you would like to achieve, but does it fit also with the roadmap and the vision of that platform or that ecosystem? And how can I participate in it? What can I bring of value and can get out of it? And of course, then the roadmap is very important there as well. Just as you pointed out, they are successful, most likely because they had a very clear vision and roadmap and a good governance around it. So it was easy to become a good participant in it, and you benefit from it. So if you would have to choose something, those are actually the key items I would advise a company to look at to find out, is this really a good platform and ecosystem I would like to place my bet on and actually get benefit out of it.
We're selfish, us humans, right? What's in it for me is one of the questions we always ask.
Yeah. At the end, you have to pay a bill, so you always wonder if you get more out of it.
So guys, what would you say that people who are interested in understanding governance or setting up a structure around governance, what's a good starting point for these people? How do you understand governance when it comes to, because governance is a complex, it's a complex issue to start off with, but when you interject technology in it, could be crazy, right? So where does one start?
You've been very nasty. This is
I am. Hey, you wanted me to talk, right? I wanted to stay quiet in this conversation, but you said no. Erik needs to say something.
Hey, dude, let me finish. Nasty for me is a compliment, because when you're nasty, you raise good points. So kidding, no, Bob. I'll leave it on to you. But this is a very
I don't know
interesting one.
if you want to answer it.
Yeah, well, I was thinking, where shall I start? Really understand why and what you want to achieve. And I think it needs to be clear what you will doing now or want to do in the ecosystem, or combining or bringing an ecosystem together, what you want to achieve now, but also in the future as a group. So not only from your own perspective, but as a group perspective, as an ecosystem. And based on that, I would then set the governance, but also decide on the technology. Yeah, that's all kind of interrelated in today's ecosystem. So I think that is more an iterative process. Choosing the technology, getting your market proposition, and your governance. I think that is which, and you shape it together. In my view, or at least transparent. Yeah, I can also see that if you start with a lot of actors, especially if there are companies, yeah, it can also take a while to someone takes the lead. So I think in the beginning, there's also someone that needs to take the lead, but it doesn't necessarily need to become the leader. And I think that is where a successful, in my view, ecosystem starts. Understanding why you're doing what you will do, and then as a group, or at least on equal and inclusive criteria, created in an iterative process. But BoB, please add.
Yeah, I completely agree. And some additions maybe that you first do a good analysis. Okay, how is my ecosystem looking like? Which are the players there? What would be my role? If would it be this orchestrator, the leader? Would it be just a realizer of a service or a product, or we enabler? So it's much more on the technological point of view, more from a business to business point of view. And that is one of the things. And then of course you have start with collecting a few people, and then just basically start with the most normal steps you usually have governance for a company also. Because what would I like to achieve? What is the purpose? What do we see as a culture? What are our values? How we actually collaborate with each other and interact with each other. So it's about culture in that perspective. And then you start thinking about, okay, about access, who can participate and what are the rules related to that? And what are then what they could actually do? What are the rules of participation? What can they do? And if there are conflicts, how do we resolve that? So the basic rules about that. And then of course, if something related with transactions happen, okay, what they have to put in or what do you get out of it? How does that been arranged? And then think about how the technology should support it. And that is basically, then you start already talking really about the value and the value distribution of it. And if you create something who has property rights, for instance, all this part comes in play as well, but it is later part. But I think the first part is to get a good overview of what your ecosystem looks like, what your role is, how you think others can participate in that. One of them should play first, maybe the leader, as Fleur points out, and find this commonality. And that is something, what would you like to achieve? And really be clear about it, because you could have on broad view something which everybody agrees on, but by time suddenly you realize that you start deviating because you didn't spend enough time to really to understand what was your original goal. I've witnessed that unfortunately myself in a number of occasions, and that's really painful. So that is something I think is one of the most important things, that you have a goal which you all want to achieve, maybe all with sub goals which are differently, but extremely clear on that, and also how you interact with each other, that you really build the right relationship with each other.
Which apparently unclear goals was the demise of the other blockchain project we heard about at the end of 2022, the Australian Stock Exchange, right?
Yeah.
Apparently that scope creep, that lack of a clear understanding where everybody was going was, again, we're not in the secrets of the gods, but that, word on the street is that that's what killed the project.
Oh, but you mentioned something really interesting, by the way, earlier in your discussion. You mentioned conflicts. Reframing this, we all know that if you reframe this on the supply chain finance side, trade finance side, conflicts, maybe some of the projects being hijacked recently, was this due to conflicts and interest or conflicting interests within the picture? What do you think about this? I mean, you see that it's banks, shippers, other financial entities. We're talking about data. Is there any maybe as conflicts into what's been done so far within the stakeholders participating in the ecosystem?
It could very well be, because the ones we mentioned are also participants out of the same industry almost, and not cross industry. And I think if you have cross industry, also that benefits from it, because you have different clear points of view coming together. And if you would like to achieve the same goal, you have still different sub goals in a way, but that one really relates to each other. And if that one is arranged in the beginning, after a while, it could be that the sub goals really got more in conflict with each other, because you're also competitors with each other in the same industry, and maybe that is creating an issue. And therefore, if I don't know if it's really conflict management, which is then the issue, which they didn't really put proper in place because of the governance, or that the goal was not really aligned properly from the beginning. That's difficult to judge, but at least it seems there was a conflict, as you mentioned, Andrea.
Fleur,
Yeah,
curious to hear your opinion too, if you want to add anything to this.
No, I was thinking like it is always a conflict, or actually a tension between the cooperation and the competition. And I think that it's the same goes for control versus openness. And I think that these are the tensions you need to set your governance. And sometimes you put mechanisms in place that serve a good cause, but has an anticipated other consequence. And then you build governance on governance, or mechanisms on mechanisms. And in this case, I actually can't add any thought into the team, but it is a tension that's there, but that could be solved. The cooperation competition, but for this case, I'm not sure.
No, in that perspective, your governance has to be flexible over time also in that perspective, because if you find out there is something not working in the relationship and there's not being brought value for each of the participants in a proper way, either you have to change your governance, or one of the participants has to think and decide to actually bail out or something like that. But the governance changing, the model of it might be a solution to it, that it works again.
Yeah. And I think in ecosystem building, you quite often hear that there's a lot of ambition to become the orchestrator. But if you look at it, it's quite a very difficult role, because you need to manage and govern the interactions between the various competitors or complementers or actors, however we call them, but also the interaction among themselves. So you have on different levels a layered governance model needed to get the interaction fluid. And that's where you always need to adapt. And I think that also has to do with, although monitoring is maybe not so much part of the governance topics we're now talking about, but I think it's very important to be proactive and understand what is happening in the dynamics, the multi-layered dynamics.
You truly have to understand that, otherwise the leader, so to say, of the ecosystem becomes like the ego, like it has to be according to me, and you get an ecosystem, and the other ones may just join for fun or something like that. And if you're also a leader in one ecosystem, it doesn't automatically make you a leader in another type of ecosystem. And there I have to think about the example of Apple again, for instance. They're extremely successful with the products, etc. It's hardware, and they created a nice ecosystem with the developers and us as users, and the use of the iPhone and etc. But then they wanted to go into the best educator and wanted to help the school children, as well as going to more into healthcare. And there they failed, because they're actually not the leader there. They're just basically the enabler of it, because they have the hardware, which maybe, or actually the orchestrate in such a way that there's contact with the end consumer in this perspective, but they're not really the leader in that perspective, because they didn't have, or were not recognized as the leader, because they were not having the insights and the real knowledge on that market as well. So yeah, you can be a leader in one ecosystem but fail completely in the other. It doesn't matter. So you really have to do good analysis, who can play which role in each of the different ecosystems, and put a good governance around it in that perspective.
which is hard because I just mentioned the interaction among the different parties. But if you're indeed active in different ecosystems where you have different roles, decision on your own governance could impact also the other where you are enabler. And I think that's, yeah, management and that oversight is very important for to manage. So you really, and there's often a lot of information asymmetry in these situations because it's so layered and complex and dynamic. So I think you have all, but that's actually why it's such a nice challenge to think about it.
I like this idea of a layered governance actually, because I think it could be interesting to apply this to supply chain finance, to trade finance. What do you think?
Well, if you think about blockchain in several already in itself, Andrea, there are different layers. The first layer is the consensus model. So you need a governance around it. Then you have the smart contract layer. So you need a governance around it. Then you have the applications built on it, which use the smart contracts as well as the tokens. So you need a governance model around it as well. So it's
technology.
And all of it is basically the lowest layer gives what inherits the upper layer of it. So, and then if you have a company around it, yeah, you should really think about it, how you deal with all these different layers, or if you use this type of technology as a platform to support your ecosystem. So it's not really an easy equation in that perspective.
No. At least it's a question you cannot answer to a small session, or you see a few hours. It takes, I think, quite a long reflection into how to structure this. It's not an easy one, but I was thinking, you're right. And per se, as you said, blockchain itself is a highly layered technology that could give rise to other layers when it comes to interacting with other technologies, namely IoTs, artificial intelligence, machine learning, call it how you like. It's layered. So this is maybe the right approach when it comes to structuring governance for blockchain application for BoB too.
Because you can have an overall forward and stretching roadmap in a way. But if you look at the different layers, then you start talking about access again. What is your participation? What can you bring for value? What are you allowed to do?
Which also makes it maybe a little bit tricky for people. I talked to a common friends of ours, by the way, Chris Sunderman, just 2 days ago, and he owned difficulties in getting on board companies and financial institutions on blockchain, which maybe slowed down the adoption itself for blockchain solutions.
I think that is a challenge, because we're now talking about the governance by the ecosystem, and then of course with the financial industry, especially the traditional ones, you get also the governance on those financial instruments, as the highly regulated business comes into play. And I think not every continent or time zone is really able to embrace blockchain technology as part of the financial services industry. And I think steps are taken. I'm not an expert in it. I think you are more, but
which is a great point. And going back again to TradeLens, speaking with some folks, one of the challenges was bringing on board banks in a specific continent where their technology was not up to maybe European or North American standards, right? So that was a concern, and it was an important part of the equation to bring on potential new shippers.
Yeah.
We discussed this, I remember, when I first started in 2020 as a chair of the once called Applied Trade Finance SIG. The difficulties in setting this up when you have to, it's bilateral international trade. So you have countries that belongs to the first tier, let's call it so, and others that belongs to down below tiers. So you have those technological gaps and standards, by the way, you rise. That makes it difficult to structure seamless solution flowing down. Think about when you have to structure operations between Europe and Africa, Europe, Middle East. That is an issue. That is a big issue. You have to take into account also the skills of the people that are set to use this technology, which also affects the onboarding on such technology. I'm not expecting people to be onboarded easily on blockchain solutions because it's going to be quite different compared to what they were used to do before. That is another issue we have to take into account, in my own opinion.
Okay,
A bit of yes and
thing
no.
about all this is that blockchain is still an emerging technology, right? And I posted an article this morning where
No longer, in my opinion.
Say that again?
It's no longer an emerging technology.
Oh, it's still an emerging technology. It's still relatively new in the overall scale of using technology. But what I was going to mention is, cloud computing was an emerging technology at one point, and now it's a bit more ubiquitous. The internet, if we go 20 years back, was an emerging technology, right? Now you don't exist if you're not on the internet. So there's a lot of hope for blockchain technology, for distributed ledger technologies, and we're in the very early days, and we need to figure stuff out like good governance.
Yeah.
I would start from this actually, because as we pointed out earlier, you start and with a good pace when you start with good governance. That is maybe the secret sauce of success. Mm-hmm. Having clear ideas. I remember in my past times when I was now for about one clear goal. And that's good governance, because if you have a clear goal in your mind, you're on the right pace to be successful in mind.
Any kind
Sorry,
of
Bob, I interrupt you.
Sorry for interrupting you, Andrea, but what you mentioned, any start with a pilot, a proof of concept, a new technology, or that, you still have to find what is the common goal, otherwise you cannot collaborate. And that's every start of any partnership. It's really important, and any start of any company. If you want to extrapolate it to a platform or an ecosystem, it's basically the same thing. It starts really with that, the common goal.
Common goal. And the difference is that you create the identity. Because if you're doing your own company, you have your own identity. And I think an ecosystem, it needs to have an identity and a clear rules.
A digital identity. What do you think? Which is a little trickier, you say, especially when you belong to those communities now. In Hyperledger, you see how many activities have been carried out and are still being carried out to fix this, because that is an issue, of course. Digital identity in general. Just one question, and I'll leave it on to both of you, because we're approaching the close of the meeting. What can we leave as message after the speech, you see, after this talk between friends, between different stakeholders? Let's call ourselves like this. Bob, you want to go first?
I think it all has to do with sharing. So be aware of it, that you want to share something. You don't want to take everything. It's all about building the right relationship so you can actually share something. You create something and you share something. And with that attitude, I think you reach the most.
Maybe I may add one word we haven't used, and that's trust, which of course, due to the blockchain technology, is there but I think that's also important in building the relationship. Yeah, you have the technology that can be trusted. You can have contracts that can be trusted, but it's also about the relationship, and there it ties into what Bob was saying about sharing.
And my favorite word, I think, is Fleur, that she mentioned, is fairness. I think that when we create these ecosystems, yes, you have different relationships, but the outcome and the value that's created from the ecosystem needs to be fair and not one-sided.
Exactly. And this, in the end, could be sort of creating a more transparent and enhanced business model, or in general, not only related to supply chain and trade. That's why I think you see this could spearhead the creation of new, more transparent business models at large. I mean, that's why, again, let's think in a different way. We have the right technology, we call it disruptive. Let's also think disruptive through governance first.
Yeah, and to point it out, the key components really are not so difficult. We have touched upon it, and if you focus on what is your mission, what you would like to achieve, what is a certain shared goal, who is access, who can participate, what are the rules and engagement with each other, how can we create value together, and how do we share it? And I think those are the 5 type of questions you have to answer, and then you have a good go with your governance.
I agree 100%. By the way, guys, closing the meeting because we're approaching an hour and it was already good content, I guess, to deliver to the community. I thank 3 of you, start with Eric. Again, sorry for this tricky setting behind my back, you see. But I would love to expand this conversation. Fleur, it was so nice to have you here. I value a lot your insights, your thoughts into this. So it's only confirming what BoB told me about you and what I read in the article at the start from, so it's good. And we'd love to cross pathway again over this year because, as mentioned, Eric and I, we would love to find out more and more and more in all of our ventures about governance, good governance and winning governance. So again, when you feel for, join us again and again. I'll try to bring in discussion some more friends of ours. I mentioned Chris, I have a few others in mind. So let's see what we can achieve actually together as output in the association.
Thank you for having me.
And before leaving, Fleur, I'm going to ask a quick favor from you. I'm going to edit this portion probably towards the beginning, but would you kindly introduce yourself?
Oh, yes.
And we'll splice that in at the beginning.
Yes. I haven't thought about it. Sorry. Okay. Hi, I'm Fleur Boos, having worked in the trade finance industry for a long time in the financial, from a financial perspective, having involved in setting up platforms based on blockchain, and currently working at the value department, and actually a PhD candidate on platform governance and ecosystems.
Awesome, thank you very much.
Yeah, was that good
very
enough?
nice to meet you.
Yeah, likewise. No,
all right, folks. Anything else you want to add before I stop the recording? All good?
Don't be shy, BoB. Don't be shy. You know we
Not
like
for
your
not for the recording.